Well, good morning. My name is Travis Reynolds. I'm the youth and family pastor, and I needed that this morning. I don't know what you're coming in with, but I do want to reiterate, as the prayer team is up here this morning, you'll see lanyards after the service that they'll have on, and if you do have any needs if you need prayer, for sure, but also if you do have specific practical needs after the storm hit last week, and you're just thinking, I don't know where I'm going to come up with food, clothes, whatever, let us know, and we'd be glad to help you out with that. And we need each other, so that's what this is for. The church, the body of Christ, comes alongside, and when one hurts, we hurt with it, and we come alongside to help. And that's been one of the beautiful things about this church the whole way through. I know there was a point, it's been 2015 around there, I have a 18, 15, and 12-year-olds right now, and the 12-year-old, when he was like 4, I remember we were standing right over there in that area, and it was right after church, and Dennis Rhodes come walking up holding Isaac's little 3-4-year-old hand. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Isaac's been hanging out with Dennis. And Dennis says, hey, I found Isaac. He was exploring the parking lot, so I figured you might want it back. And we're like, wait, you ever lost your kid before? You didn't realize they were lost until they came back? And you're like, oh, no, what have we done? How long has he been missing? Because 3-4-year-olds, man, they just squirt out everywhere, and so they just find their way to disaster. So Dennis was cool, and he brought him back in. It meant a lot to us, and so he was there for us. And if you've ever lost your kid, I know you might be thinking, he's a horrible parent. Well, that was 2015, and he's older now, so he survived. You've probably been, I don't want to say we've all been there, but I'm pretty sure if you have a kid, we've all been there at some point. And this is a story about Jesus getting lost by his parents. I don't think Jesus was lost, but his parents definitely lost him. So if you want to go to Luke chapter 2, that's where we're going to spend some time this morning. We're going to talk about how to grow up like Jesus. And you might be thinking, I'm already grown up. I'm an adult. We all are in the process of growing up. So be encouraged. We all need to hear what it looks like to grow up like Jesus. And this story that leads up to it is the only snapshot we have of Jesus between, when the wise men come to visit, that's more like Jesus as a toddler, age 2-ish. And then we get him at age 30 when John baptizes him. In between there, of all the stories that could be told of Jesus, there's a 12-year-old Jesus, and this is what happens to him. It says in Luke chapter 2, verse 41. It says, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, and his parents did not know it. So there's your setting, right? They go to Passover every year. I don't know if you have any annual vacations that you take. This was a mandatory break that God put in and said, we have to remember about how God delivered us from Egypt, saved our people. And this was one of those moments where the whole family goes. This isn't just Mary and Joseph, it's the kids, it's the cousins, it's the uncles and aunts, it's everybody. And you all go together. There's no cars, so you just kind of caravan together. You walk there, you walk back, and it's days worth of a journey. And so they're going up together. But as they were returning, Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, and they didn't know it. This is like Home Alone 2, like not so much 1, but like 2, where Kevin McAllister's lost in New York. This is Jesus lost in Jerusalem, except he's not lost. So the parallel skips somewhere, I understand. But if you've ever been lost before, it's a pretty scary thing as the kid to realize you're lost. It's a whole different experience being the parent knowing your kid is lost. Because verse 44 explains how this happens. You're like, how did they lose Jesus? But supposing him to be in their group, they went a day's journey, but then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem, searching for him. This is how it would go, right? Because if you've been with big family vacations before, you understand how the process works. The adults, you kind of walk together, so you're talking about things because the kids don't care about adult conversations until they do, but then they don't anymore because it gets boring. And then, so the kids kind of hang out together. Jesus is 12. And he wants to be around people his age, so all the cousins are walking together in a little cousin mob, and then you have the adult mob over here. They just kind of meander around. You eat lunch, you don't see Jesus, but it's not a huge deal because everybody's everywhere, and so just make sure you eat something. And then dinner comes along, same deal. But then when it comes time to sleep, you get your family back together, hit the tent, and you sleep. Only when it comes time to hit the tent, Jesus' little brother and sisters are there. Like, hey, have you guys seen Jesus? And he's like, oh, I thought he was with you guys. Like, wait, did you guys see Jesus? Hey, did we lose Jesus? Did we lose the Messiah? It's a pretty freaky thing to know that you're missing your kid. But when you had an angel let you know that this is going to be the Son of God to which we will entrust him to your care, that's scary. That's scary. And they went looking for him. And verse 46, after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And that's how they found Jesus. Now, we don't know how long. It says it took 3 days. The assumption is that's a day's journey out. They're missing him. A day's journey back. And then a day looking for him. At minimum, that's 2 nights. There's some people who say it was a journey there and back, and then they spent 3 days searching for him through the city, which is totally possible. 3 days is a long time. That means 2 nights of not sleeping if you're the parents, because I can't believe we lost him. And all the what ifs, right? Every potential extravagant, ridiculous what if comes into your head when you've lost your kid. And this is 3 days. And where do they find him? In the temple. And it's interesting because they find him sitting among the teachers. He was listening to them and asking them questions. And it actually says in the next one, all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. So he's asking them questions. They're asking him questions. And this would be like in Home Alone 2 if they found him, but he's teaching at NYU and all the professors are sitting in the audience. You're like, wait, who is this kid? And that would be an absurd movie plot, except this is the thing that actually happened. Is all the wisest, most prestigious religious leaders in Israel in the temple at the same time, and they're sitting down with Jesus. They've been missing their kid for 3 days. You know that sense when you find your kid, that sense of relief and anger that hit all at once? But also, you walk in on this scene. It's one thing if he's sitting there kicking rocks with his friend. Still glad to see him. You still might damage him because of how angry he is. But this is you walk in and you think, what is happening? It's why, verse 48, when his parents saw him, they were astonished, which feels like a good adjective to describe what's happening because there's a lot of different emotions that are hitting at once, and they were astonished. And his mother said to him something very on brand for a mom. She says, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." We'll get to the part where you're teaching the teachers later. Right now, this is I want to hear the non-translated version. When we get to heaven, you ask Mary, how did that sound? Because it's a totally reasonable question. If your kid has been missing for 3 days, to be able to say, "Son, why have you treated us so? Why did you do this to us? We were freaking out. You have distressed us, put us in great distress." They were angry, but they were relieved, but they were questioning what's happening here all at once, and it just comes out with, why would you do this to us? And it's the right question to ask. That word distress, by the way, is the same. The other time you see that word great distress is when Lazarus, his friend, is describing what it's like to be in hell. When he says, "I am in great distress. If you would just give me a drop of water on my tongue to give me some relief," as it describes in the Gospels. And so there's a very real parallel to the hell it feels when you have lost your kid. And she's like, we were undone. It was the worst feeling you could ever experience to know that our kid is missing. Why would you do this to us? Do you know what it's like to be around a 12-year-old? Do they always give the answers that you're that satisfy you when things don't go the way you expect? No, they don't. We're on our third 12-year-old in our house right now. He's 12. We have 15 and 18. So listen to Jesus' answer and tell me how this would fly with if your mom said, hey, why did you do this to us? We were freaking out, man. And he said to them in verse 49, why were you looking for me? Now listen, there's another half to that helps you understand it. But if he just sticks with that, oh man, how would that go in your house? Like your parents miss you for 3 days and your mom says, your father and I, which by the way, if your mom ever says your father and I, what follows isn't great for you. And so your father and I were freaking out. Why were you looking for me? Like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Why were we looking for you? You've been gone for 3 days, man. But he follows with this. Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? What? Jesus is going to say, I imagine this happened a lot where Jesus says things. I mean, it happens just reading the Gospels, but if you're living in house with 12-year-old Jesus, he would say things sometimes where you're like, I think you're right. But I don't know what to do with that because I'm all angered up. But I think you're right, which is why it says in verse 50, they did not understand the saying he spoke to them. Don't you love the honesty of Scripture? There's such high-level theological ideas, and his ways are beyond our ways, and his thoughts are beyond our thoughts. But when you zoom in on what that looks like in personal interaction between a mom and her 12-year-old, you're like, oh, that makes sense. I can see that. Because you say, why would you do this to us? He's like, why were you looking for me? Didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house? And he says that to his mom and Joseph, who is basically his stepdad, the one who has stepped in to raise him, but is not his biological father. And what is Joseph thinking? He's like, yeah. I mean, you go back to that dream Joseph had and the conversation Gabriel had with Mary, and you're like, oh, this is what he was talking about. And we don't know what conversations have happened before this, but what we do know is that at age 12, Jesus knew his role. He knew that he is Messiah, and he's about to fill this role that nobody else can fill. And he would have been right to say, actually, this is where I belong. But instead, verse 51, he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. That's a consistent phrase that you see with Mary. She treasured up all these things in her heart, which is the right thing to do. Anytime you see God do something that only God can do, you treasure it up in your heart. You walk in, if I walked in and saw, like I know a bunch of 7th graders because doing youth ministry, if I saw any of them sitting here with Tony Plummer and the group of elders and they're like laying out what theology is supposed to look like what, astonished would be the word, like what is happening right now? And they're asking him questions and they're like taking notes on what my 12-year-old's saying, like that's a great point, man. What? And so she treasures up all these things in her heart. Mary saw who he was starting to be, and Jesus knew who he was. And we see Jesus for who he is, it will change us too. And as you see Jesus at this point, that's the snapshot we get. Age 12 Jesus, that story right there. And then you know what we get for age 12 to 30 is verse 52. How does Jesus grow from this point? And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and favor with man. Isn't that a pretty good description of what it looks like to grow up? And I want to do the rest of this by breaking down each of those categories, but I want you to think of age 12 Jesus. I mean, you think of yourself at age 12, 7th grade. You generally start off 7th grade at age 12. What did you want to be when you grow up, when you were 12 years old? Do you have that in your head? That's a standard question that adults have been asking kids for a long time. It's like one of the few questions that you feel like you can bring some kind of relatability to. You can kind of get to know them a little bit. They tell you like fireman or YouTube influencer now, and you're like, what are you supposed to do with it? Is that a job? Can you do that? And it is, by the way, and it's not easy. So there's a whole category for 12-year-olds of, what do you want to do? And it starts to shift a little. I remember when I was 12 years old, I was 7th grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Farrar at Venice Middle School, and she was the best. I remember talking to her in class, and she would like ask me questions about my life outside of school. She seemed like a teacher who liked it, who liked her job. You remember that? You ever have teachers who liked their job? There's plenty of teachers who are putting in their time, especially down here. A lot of teachers tend to like retire down here. They're just putting in their time until they get done. But there's some teachers who are like, man, you care about students. And she would joke around with us about who liked who. And then I remember one time, it was geography, so I was kind of into history and geography anyways. But I remember one time we're doing a project with groups, and she turned on the TV and turned on Price is Right, so we could watch that while the group project was going on. I was like, what? You know the Price is Right? You know that there's a world outside of this classroom? Because, you show up and the teacher is there, you leave and the teacher is there. You just assume, like, I don't know that you live here, but that would kind of make sense because this is where I always see you. And so, like, oh, you know about the outside world. So I remember riding with my dad in 7th grade, and I was like, my answer had always been like fireman or drummer in a band if the fireman didn't work out. I said, I think I can see being a teacher. He goes, really? Why is that? And so I kind of laid out Ms. Farrar seems cool, and it would be fun to have a job that you like, where I like that subject, and I like people. And then, you know what? I fast forward through high school and college. I don't know how your story goes, what you wanted to be when you were 12, but I never changed my major. I started off as a social science education major at UCF, finished that, did a Bible study program in Texas for a year, came back, and my first job was 7th grade geography teacher at Venice Middle School. So I worked that job for years before I got this job. And it was what I hoped it would be. It was really fun to be that teacher that Mr. Reynolds got to care about kids. And I loved the angle of being able to talk to him about Jesus and kind of sneak that into conversations about how the world got here and how kingdoms rise and fall and stuff like that. But age 12 was where that seed was planted of, I can see doing that. And then, I don't know how your story ends with that, but for Jesus, you wonder, what did he want to be when he grew up? And options were limited. Back then, you kind of just did whatever your family did, or somebody close to your family you get an apprenticeship with. Usually, whatever your last name was is what you're likely to do. If you know anybody with the last name of Carpenter, that could very well have been Jesus' last name, because that was his job, Jesus Carpenter. Baker, the last name Baker, Potter, Smith, Fisher, Mason, Plumber. He's out of his realm up here. And then I found this week that Reynolds means royal advisor. I don't get to be the royal, but I can be like, you should do this. And now I still kind of get to tell Tony, like, have you thought of this? But he's a plumber, so I don't know what I'm doing. So look at verse 52. I want you to see what it looks like to grow up. From age 12, what does it look like to grow up? And I want to approach this from two different directions, because on one hand, this is, if you have children, this is the structure by which you want your children to grow up. So these 4 categories, because these are also the categories by which we want to grow up, whatever age you are. When I ask, what do you want to be when you grow up, some of you are like, I'm still trying to figure that out, man. I'll let you know when I find it out. And that's fine. But whatever the thing is you want to do isn't really who you are. Who you are is defined by these categories: wisdom, stature, favor with God, favor with man. No matter where you're at in your journey of life, these are areas where we still need to grow. If it is for your kids, I'll tell you this. There is a quote by Kara Powell, who's a leader at the Fuller Youth Institute, and she says this: when it comes to your kids, you get who you are. So you can say a lot of things, but if those things you say are not congruent with the life that you live, it will be reflected in the life of your kids. They sniff that out so fast. And you want to be living a life, because she says, really, if you want to zoom in on that, you don't really even get who you are. You get who your kids think you are. And a lot of that you can't control. So you just have to let them, the big thing is let your kids know, let your grandkids know, hey, I'm still figuring this out too. One of the consistent conversations I have with students about parents is, hey, your parents are people too. And they're like, yeah, I know. I'm like, no, seriously. We don't know what we're doing like you think we do. And that's a scary thing to say because it's like, I knew it. Like, I know. Everybody knows it. We just keep it quiet. But here's the thing. The same grace that you want your parents to show you when you mess up, you need to show your parents when they mess up. And they're like, oh, that's not cool. I'm not down with that part. I like the first part, but I'm not down with this part. And we're like, yeah, this is what it looks like, man. We're all trying to figure it out. So if you can let your kids know, hey, I'm not going to be perfect at this. There are things that I know, but I'm going to miss sometimes. And so I need you to be careful in how you call that out, and I'll be careful in how I call that out in you. So as you go through these categories, understand that's where we're coming through. Because I was at a counselor a few weeks ago. I'm 45 now, and I'm experiencing a lot of the same things, but it's hitting me different. And I was like, what's happening to me? Something's shifting. And she said, hey, you've worked with students like your whole adult life. You know that process of your kids going through like awkward phases, but then it kind of smooths out until they hit another awkward phase, and then it smooths out. She goes, I said, yeah, for sure, I've seen that. She said, well, we're pretty good about research on that until they turn 21, 25, around there. What we don't acknowledge often is that will happen for the rest of your life until you die. Is you'll hit these awkward patches where you're like, why don't things make sense right now? I feel like it was moving smooth and now it feels rocky. But then it'll kind of smooth out, and then you'll hit another awkward. She goes, you're in one of those shifts. And she's like, that's about the age when it hits. I'm like, well, good, I guess. And it helped clarify things for me. I was like, okay, man, this growth really is your whole life. God consistently puts you in a place where you have to rely on him, which is why we need wisdom, which is the first area that he says that Jesus grew. I gave you, you should have gotten a handout on your way in, and so we're going to go through a lot of scriptures. We could spend a whole lot of time on each one of these, so it might be hard to keep up with the notes, so I thought, I just want you to have these. Feel free to take notes on this as you want, but we're going to move through these pretty quick for the rest of our time together, just to see what does it look like to grow in these different areas. And this will be more of a survey than going in depth on it, but I want you to be able to go in depth later as you want to look at these verses and figure out what God is trying to tell you. So what is wisdom? I've heard a lot of different definitions for this. There's a very old man who was talking to me when I first became a youth pastor. He described wisdom like this. He said, it is the ability to live life skillfully with a minimum number of mistakes. And I always like that. Applied knowledge is another good definition of wisdom. We just talked about wisdom with Grace Kids in August. And that one was, wisdom is finding out what you should do and doing it, which I love the simplicity of that one. That might be my favorite one. Because you know some really intelligent, dumb people? You ever met them before? Like, you are a foolish, intelligent person. Knowing what to do doesn't do a lot for you if you don't do it. So you got to know what to do and do it. That is what wisdom is. Biblically, how does the Bible describe it? Proverbs, where does it start? Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The knowledge of the Holy One is insight. It begins with the fear of the Lord. If you don't have a proper respect and awe, and quite honestly, the word literally means fear, to be afraid of the Lord. There should be a reality where you see the massiveness of God, like just even getting a glimpse of it, and in light of how small I am, there should be oh man, it's scary how big and powerful he is in light of how small and weak I am. It makes you stop advising God with your prayers and start receiving his wisdom. That's what the design is. I am a lot more capable to receive wisdom when I see myself in proper relation to God. And that's what the fear of the Lord puts you in. And the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. which means you got to know God. You can't obey what you don't know. But it's not just about knowing what to do. It's about knowing who's commanding it. Know the character of God. We get to be in a relationship with God, and that's a pretty amazing thing. And that's where wisdom comes from. Proverbs 4:7 says the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. And whatever you get insight. The beginning of wisdom is get wisdom. It feels really obvious, and I think that's what a lot of Proverbs is like, well, yeah, duh. But also, I should probably do that. You'll find yourself, as you read through Proverbs, doing that a lot. Well, obviously, I guess, okay, I'll do that thing. Wisdom doesn't happen to you. You have to pursue it. So the people you know who are wise have pursued wisdom. And so what does it mean to get it? How do I get wisdom? I'm glad you asked. James chapter 1, verse 5. This verse was on the screen earlier during worship. They read through 8 verses of the book of James. James 1:5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. Every day, the first thing you do when you wake up, ask God for wisdom. Before I throw the covers off every morning, this is the prayer I pray. God, give me wisdom today. Because it feels like that verse that Solomon says where I don't know when to go out or come in, so give me wisdom, God. Because it feels like there's so many things that I'm responsible for, and I really don't want to mess any of them up. I want to keep my mistakes small, so give me wisdom. Not just to do the right thing, but to recognize when I'm being an idiot and I'm going off the rails. So pray for wisdom. Ask God. Again, it feels like, well, yeah, obviously, but seriously, ask God for wisdom. How do you get wisdom? Ask God. And then ask others. Proverbs 19:20. Listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future. Are any of you bad at asking for help? You don't have to raise your hand. It's hard sometimes because you don't want to be a burden to people. You should be able to figure this out. You know better. I should know this. I shouldn't have to ask for help. Well, you do. Listen to advice. Ask for help. You need help, and this isn't just for high-level theological conversation to really understand creation's origins or the depths of the gospel. This is like, I don't know what to do with my kid. I need help with money. My car is busted. I had a situation at work I'm not sure how to handle. Find somebody who's good at that thing and ask them. But you got to be careful what kind of advice you receive, because a lot of people give foolish advice. And so James chapter 3, verse 17 tells you how to receive that wisdom. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. You got to be careful what wisdom you receive. Some people think they're giving wisdom. They're not. They're just dispensing their own foolishness. Some people tell you it's wisdom so that they can manipulate you into them getting what they want. And we've all been on that side, and it is so frustrating. It's really frustrating when you see it in the moment. It's really angering when you realize it after the fact. You're like, oh, wait, that's what happened? When somebody gives you sincere wisdom, it is full of good fruit. It is pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason. There was a girl last week at youth group on Tuesday night who's in 7th grade, and afterwards she's like, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah, for sure. She said, how do I hear the voice of God? I said, why are you asking? She goes, well, I hear people say that you should listen for the voice of God. And I talk to him and I pray, but I literally never hear him talk to me. And you're like, oh, that's a totally reasonable question from a 12-year-old who's trying to figure it out. So she asked for advice. How do I hear from, and some of you are like, I want to know that answer too. Well, here you go. Read his word. And he will tell you what applies to your life. And then you talk to him and you receive these moments where you have an urge inside of you where you say, you need to go help that person. That person needs a conversation. You need to ask them how they're doing. And she goes, but how do I know that's what it is? I said, honestly, you'll get better at it as you go. But right now, understand his word. And she has great parents. I said, talk to your mom and dad. They'll help you figure out what that looked like for them. But That's a great question. And she was wise enough to ask for advice. Wisdom isn't knowing all the answers, it's being willing to know who to ask for help. So she did. On the other hand, there was a point a month ago, my son's about to turn 16, the other one, and we were going around looking for cars. He'd been saving up money. He's been working really hard, like $5,000 for a car. Went to a car dealership that said they had a car under $5,000, and surprise you, it is not. We get there, and the advertised price is not what they came out with. And the guy said, here you go. We can get it to you for, it looks like $12,000. Like, oh, that's way farther away. He said, how much money do you have to spend? I said, well, like I said when I came in, $5,000. And he goes, so what's your lowest you're willing to go? I was like, this might surprise you, $5,000. He says, so you're telling me if we can get this down to $5,000, you'll buy it today? Like, will you sign this piece of paper? And he put an X on a blank piece of paper and drew a line. I'm like, I will sign that meaningless piece of paper. And he comes back and he goes, good news, $8,500. We were able to get it there. But listen, I'm telling you, this is the best deal you're going to find. And I had really talked my manager down. Like, this is a thing that happened. This isn't like one of those stereotypical, like, generic stories. This is a real story at a local dealership I will not name. And he's like, and I really had to talk my manager down for this. You're never going to see this kind of deal again. Like, you're never going to see any of my money. So we said, hey, thanks for the help, man. We have nothing for you today. He's like, are you sure? I could talk to him again. I'm like, can you get it for $5,000? He goes, I don't think that's possible, man, but we might be able to bring it down a little bit. I'm like, no. He was lying to manipulate. He was giving what he said was wise advice to try to get us to do the thing that he wanted, that we did not want and had expressly stated several times. That next verse on your list, that Proverbs 27:12. The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. Man, this is one of my favorite verses to talk to students about and anybody, because most of us have been down this path enough times that you can at least see it coming. When you see danger coming, you're standing on the tracks and you're like, hey, that's a train coming. You should get off the tracks. And you're like, I got this. Don't you worry. I can handle myself. Like, you definitely can't. You should get off those tracks. Like, I got it. When you see danger coming, get out the way. Or stay put and suffer the consequences. You're like, hey, I feel like that relationship's bad for you. You probably shouldn't be in that relationship. Hey, that job is toxic and it's really bad. You should get out. Whatever the something is, you try to point out to your friends, to your family, and they feel very confident. Even though everybody around, by the way, if everybody around you that you genuinely care about and at some point in your life have respected their opinion and they're all like, you're wrong, then you're wrong. And everybody else is right. I'm generalizing this, but seriously, if everybody that you care about that is pursuing Jesus says, hey, that really is bad for you, then get out the way. That's what wisdom looks like. All right. We could spend a lot of time on that one. We're going to move on. Stature. Jesus grew in stature. Stature is the same word that we get statue. It's just your physical body. He was 12 years old. And 12, 13 is when you start to hit that growth spurt. And so he was physically going to grow quite a bit. He grew with his body. And I had the guy who discipled me out in Texas, he said in a very Texas way, your body is the only horse God gives you to ride, and you got to take care of that thing for the rest of your life. And you're like, okay, I get what you're saying. I've never ridden a horse, so I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. But you get the point. I talked to students about this a few weeks ago, and I said, if you could only get one car, so you guys are 11, 12, 13 years old, if you get one car right now, you could pick any car, but you have to drive it for the rest of your life. What would you choose? And surprisingly, they chose very inefficient, very fast cars that would not hold more than one other human, or maybe a motorcycle. And you're like, this is why you don't give 12-year-olds that responsibility. This is the car we get. This is the only vehicle I get to have. You are not your body, but your body carries you around. Someday your body will die and you will continue. And God has blessed us with this, and we need to take care of it. And there's a holy sacredness to what he has given us. And it has been broken by the consequences of sin, but we're to take care of what we got. So what does this mean? Let me just give you a few perspectives on what God has done giving us a body. First of all, your body isn't yours. So 1 Corinthians 6:19, I said that out loud, and I read it again. I think that's a weird sentence, right? Your body isn't yours. Here's why I say that. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. Did you know that you aren't yours? If you are a follower of Jesus, your body has been bought with a price. When Jesus died on the cross and he rose again in his new body, and you said, I will accept that sacrifice as a forgiveness for my sins, that means my old self has died and a new self lives in its place. I don't get to do whatever I want with my body. Is it your body? Is it your choice? Within boundaries. And within those boundaries, you aren't yours. You don't get to decide what happens to you. It says in 1 Corinthians 6:12, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. Just because it's not wrong, does that make it a good idea? No, again, conversations that we all get to have with teenagers and each other. When it says in 1 Corinthians 6:19, that previous verse, you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. The question is the thing I'm about to do with my body going to glorify God or not? And if the answer is no, then don't do that thing, which is much easier to say now than it is in 45 minutes when I'm ordering food, right? But it's still applicable. There was a guy, don't look this up, which you will now that I've just said that, but there's a guy on the internet who videoed himself in a time lapse cutting pieces off of a lawnmower, putting them in his mouth, swallowing the piece of metal, one tiny piece of metal at a time, until he consumed an entire push mower. That's a thing that happened with our humanity. Was that wrong? Like, you're not going to find a verse that says not to do it. Is it wise? No. It's really dumb. But also, I watched the whole thing. So, are you allowed to eat a whole lawnmower? Like, I suppose. It's just not wise, and you shouldn't do it. There's a lot of things in your life that you have to figure out. Is this okay for me to do? It's not wrong, but it's dumb. Like, you shouldn't do it. So, for example, did you know they make Oreo-flavored Coca-Cola? And, reverse, Coca-Cola-flavored Oreos. I said this first service because I think that shouldn't exist. Because I like Coke and I like Oreos, but I feel like it would ruin both. And then I have this conversation, and then afterwards somebody comes up to me with a can of Oreo-flavored Coca-Cola. And listen, it ruins both. It's terrible. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because we're capable of doing something doesn't mean you should do that thing. At some point, somebody's been in a marketing meeting and said, you know what would be a great idea? If we get $1 billion from Nabisco to put Oreos in our Coke. Somebody's like, we will take that money and ruin Coke. And they did. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. I spent too much time on that, I'm sorry. Genesis 1:27. God made you in his image. Let us make man in our image, is what God said. You have value because you are made in the image of God. No other creation is made in the image of God. It is only humans. We have an eternal state. We get to live forever. We are made in the image of God, so your body has value to it. And if you don't like what you see in the mirror, if you wish it was different, I understand, and sin has messed up the perfection of God's creation. But I will say this, even within that, David says this in Psalm 139, you are made as you are on purpose by God. if you don't know these verses, I encourage you to just linger in these for a while later if this has been a struggle with insecurity. Psalm 139, verses 13 to 16 say this: For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance, and in your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. You were knitted together by God to be exactly how you are, not to show the world how great you are, but to glorify God. That's the design. You are made to glorify God with your body. And if you're wondering how Jesus looked, by the way, Isaiah 53 verse 2 says that he had no beauty or majesty that attracted us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. There was nothing especially attractive about God. Most movies and TV shows about Jesus make him pretty handsome. It says in the Bible that he probably wasn't. He was not the Thor kind of God. Although when he comes back in Revelation, he's riding this white horse and he's like warrior. He's got a sword coming out of his mouth. His eyes are like fire. He's got King of Kings on one side leg and Lord of Lords on the other side of his leg. And I don't know what that all looks like, but that's different than what he was when he was here. You are made in the image of God. Take that in. If you've struggled with this, ask for wisdom from somebody who's been through it, who can help you, because this is a real source of struggle for so many of us. Jesus grew in favor with God, which is always a strange way of presenting it. How does Jesus grow in favor with God? But I will say this: favor with God, favor with man. The word favor means what it sounds like. You have a favorite pizza topping, it's the one you prefer. God likes you. He doesn't just love you. We know that God loves us, but what if you knew that God likes you? Even when you're unlikable, because that's how perfect he is. How could you grow closer to God this year? The reality is, Jesus invites us into a relationship. That's where wisdom comes from a relationship with God. When he bridges that gap on the cross, he draws us to himself in a way that allows us to be with him. Sin cannot be with holiness. They cannot. It's not that he's unwilling, it can't. So sin has to be removed for us to be next to Jesus. And the cross removes our sin. And we get to be reconciled with Jesus. And then we get to grow closer to him. And you're like, what does that mean, though? This is the only verse that's not on there. It might be the most important verse, and I realized this yesterday after they had already printed out. So you're going to have to write in Hebrews 4:16, because this kind of frames out all the other attributes of God and what it means to grow in favor with God. Hebrews 4:16 says, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." And you're like, what is that supposed to mean? Here's what that means. God is on a throne. It's really important for you to know that God is on a throne. He needs to be King of Kings, Lord of Lords, fear the Lord, beginning of wisdom kind of God. He needs to be completely sovereign, and he is. He is on a throne. Throne of grace is a pretty contradictory phrase. A throne is where justice is meted out. I get to do whatever I want, and you have to listen. But grace says, I will give you what you don't deserve. I will give you love that is unmerited favor. It is God on his throne who kneels down to say, hey, come here. 4-year-old, you were lost. It's okay now. We're back. It's okay. I'm not going to throw judgment at you. I'm going to take you in again and again and again and again. The throne of grace. This is how you want God. He has to be, if he's just gracious but not powerful, that doesn't do anything for me. But if he's just powerful and not gracious, that's terrifying. But he exists on a throne of grace that we can approach it to find mercy and grace to help whenever we need it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you want God to be king, but I also need him to be Father. And not just Father. That word Father, when they say, Jesus teaches how to pray, and Jesus says, pray like this: Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. That word Father is Abba, which means dad. There's an intimacy with the word dad. There's only 3 people in the world who can call me dad. And there's a sweetness there. There's a closeness there. So you wanted to be King of Kings, but Father. See how it works? But he's also, and you'll go through these verses later, but you see them there. He is a friend. He is our brother. He is a husband to the bride of Christ. He is that intimate. He is a teacher who knows what we need to hear. He is a shepherd who corrects us when we're wrong. He is our head. Even in relation to our own body, he is the one who leads us. He is the perfect version of every relationship we have on earth that reveals the beauty of who he is. Every relationship we have is this little glimpse, this little side view, this little perspective shift to help us understand how he wants to relate to us. And it's beautiful. You guys are busy today. We're almost done, I swear. We're almost done. This feels like teaching high school now. All right, here's what that means. If you have a God who knows you, who loves you, then it will change the way you relate to the people around you. We have this vertical relationship with God, favor with God, and we have a horizontal relationship with the world, our relationship with man. And if you have the proper relationship with God, the way you love people is going to change. How can grace exist in a person? When grace exists in a person like Jesus, it shows up when the Holy Spirit Jesus is fully submissive to the Holy Spirit, to the will of the Father, in a way that the fruit of the Spirit shows up perfectly in every interaction he ever has. And I wrote down a bunch of stuff on that note sheet. He shows, and I was thinking about specific moments through the course of this time: mercy and forgiveness. He went to people who needed him. He was compassionate, told the truth. He fed people who needed it. He was selfless. He was kind to, he was nice to children. He respected his parents. What I could have just said, and what you should write up there, is fruit of the Spirit. That's what he showed. And you think of what the fruit of the Spirit are, and I just want you to feel the emotional hit of each of these, and imagine each of these being perfectly on display in a person. There was love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Imagine one person embodying all of those. Do you think Jesus was likable? This isn't a trick question. Do you think he was likable? Do you think everybody liked him? No. A lot of times people don't like likable people because they get jealous of how liked they are, and so they turn against them. Jesus fully fulfilled these things. Now listen, if you were somebody who was taking advantage of the poor and abusing others for your benefit, you wouldn't have that. Because that's not what love does. Love doesn't put up with that. And so sometimes you have to love people in a hard way. And that's what Jesus would do, while having full self-control. What does that look like for us? John 13:34 and 35 says this. So now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you're my disciples. How can this whole world know that we are disciples of Jesus? By how strongly we stand for our politics, and by how well we can argue apologetics, and how much we invite people to church. No? I hope you realize that I'm being sarcastic. It's important. This part's important. If you wrote those down, you should just scratch them out. Because the Bible doesn't say those things. It says, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Your love to the people you see around you and to the rest of the world will prove that you are my disciples. Nobody cares what you stand for if you don't love well. And even then, they probably don't care what you stand for. Just love people well. That doesn't mean put up with everything, but love them well. Like Jesus. Be patient and good and faithful and joyful. Be a source of peace. See what we're saying? Like, none of this is complicated. This is all stuff that you think, yeah, I do want those things for my kid. To be wise, take care of their body, to love God and love people well. And some of you at this point, you're like, this is a lot, man. Like, there's a lot of verses here. There's a lot of things. I don't even know where to start. Like, I got lists on lists for each of these. Let me encourage you. Start with one thing. Let me tell you the one thing. If you're like, I got my thing. I'm going to go on a diet. Like, maybe, but do that second after this one thing. Favor with God. Pursue that. Which means to get favor with God, you pursue a relationship. You listen to what he has to say. You find people who can encourage you to help understand what God's saying to you. So you get some wisdom in there from people that care about you. And then you talk to God. And then you follow through with what he tells you to do. And I'm telling you, if you pursue a favor with God, you'll find yourself being more wise. You will find yourself taking care of yourself. And you will find yourself being a fruit of the Spirit to the people around you. It all comes from that. If you are wise and people like you and you take care of your body, but you have no pursuit of God, those other things don't matter. Pursue Jesus. And through that, have an influence where people know that who God is because they see you glorifying God with your body. They see you loving people well. As you go through these phases of awkward and smooth for the rest of your life, come back to this. God, how do you want me to grow through this? This is what I've been doing the last few weeks. God, how do you want me to grow through this? I need this. I need you. Show me what to do. Grow with Jesus. After this, again, if you need help specifically with stuff going on in your life, come up here. There's people with the prayer lanyards on. If you need prayer, they will also pray for you too. But let me pray for you now. Jesus, help us to grow closer to you. We want to be known for our love, and forgive us for the times when we've missed that. We want to glorify you by what we say, by what we do, by our humility. So do it for us, God. We need you to be king on the throne, and we need you to be the one who offers us grace when we mess up. Thank you for your forgiveness and for your kindness. Bless us today as we go out from here. Let us honor you and glorify you today. In your name we pray. Amen.